Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Redhawk Roundup here on Frontier Community Access Television. I'm Mason Smith here with Tyler Wolkowitz. Our cameraman for the day is Logan Wolkowitz and producer is Kevin Murphy. We have a new episode here for you today talking about the 2024 fall season of Redhawks sports. So we're going to be talking about everything from football to field hockey and a little bit more of the winter season coming up. A look at basketball, hockey, and a couple of the co-ops as well. So be sure to stay tuned until the end to hear our look forward on the winter season before we have that episode out of the winter season of Redhawk sports. All right, so first up, the sport we're going to be talking about from the fall first is going to be football. Now, they ended the year with a 4-6 record. I believe just slightly worse than last year. Yeah, one loss and one win traded off there. But they went on a bit of a streak there at the end of the season, closing out with 2 wins on their consolation games. But a lot going on shifting throughout the season with that team, Tyler.
Absolutely, Mason. Yeah, I mean, after last year, they lost some strong players, predominantly Aiden Dredge, Alex Schreiber, a lot of strong players. So everyone was curious about how that would affect the team this year, but they definitely did show up throughout the season.
Yeah, they did. And, you talked about Aiden Dredge being lost. And, we'll focus on the defensive aspect in a moment here. But losing your starting quarterback is something, on every level of football, it's catastrophic. And it's something that teams have, even in the NFL, some really have not been able to recover from their franchise quarterback leaving for years and years afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely, Mason. And this Frontier team has really been having a fantastic experiment with it. They started off strong with trying to have Jared Dredge take over from his older brother, but eventually they pivoted to different things, have Caden James and Ben Karen take over. Yeah,
and part of that had to do with his injury that he sustained, which brings us to another big talking point of the season, which is injuries. He sustained a concussion, which knocked him out of that starting position and gave us the whole interesting sequence that we had with James and Karen swapping out as quarterback. And it ended up working out for the Hawks, more or less. I feel like they faced some really tough opponents here and there, but when they had a pretty evenly matched team against them, they were able to compete very well.
Yeah, really, Mason. They played very solid overall, but specifically on defense, again, new quarterback. They started with the passing, but they got some really strong runs. There was time where players would break away, and especially I feel like we have to highlight here Caden James.
Yeah,
for sure.
Totally.
Absolute beast.
And he wasn't even the leader in rushing yards. He made his impact in a lot of other ways, especially defensively. Leader in tackles for the whole team, I believe. Yes. Yep. And but the rushing yard leader was Brady Pareda, who almost got. He was very close. He had 466 yards, so almost breaking 500 on the season, which is, it's a remarkable thing.
Yeah,
really.
It's a feat, nevertheless, to be that strong. It's
absolutely.
Incredible. Yep. And it was, they both were very strong. It was clearly the threat the teams had to prepare, and the elites watching the film of how they were going to stop James and how they were going to stop Pareda. Both very separate game styles there. But overall, they worked in great continuity. But again, with the underscore of injuries going on, there's many people, especially Jack Phillips, that shifted how they were going to play.
Yeah, Jack Phillips really stepped up this year. And that's another, circling back to the injuries, a lot of injuries on this Redhawks team. Phillips started off the year, he was out for a couple games with a concussion. And then there was Levi Pickard. He was out for the whole season, broken collarbone. And then, of course, the big, really catastrophic injury, which really ruined a lot of the Redhawks' chances in many games, was Javian Cabrera and that dislocated shoulder that, it was first drive of the game on offense for the Redhawks, and he went down hard, was carted off. And, I don't know if they really recovered fully from that, Tyler.
It was an absolutely heartbreaking loss for the team, Mason. Not only for the Frontier team, which it echoed throughout there, but also for wrestling in the winter. And for shot put in the spring. So that's...
Yeah, he's a tri-sport athlete, and that kind of a loss, especially in his senior year, for him personally, it must have been so hard.
Absolutely.
But he's trying to come back in wrestling towards the end of the year, I know, but it's a delicate thing. You don't want to hurt yourself even more. But defensively, the Hawks really showed up in a lot of ways, especially they grew a lot in their secondary play. throughout the season, I think.
Absolutely. I think that, again, coming back to Caden James, I feel like his leadership on the team, both on and off the field, has been incredible. We have seen many times where he's calling out exactly what the defense is going to do, memorizing the film, looking at the quarterback, and figuring out what's going on.
Yeah, and that kind of commitment, knowing and anticipating the other team's plays, it's something that, can really make a team leader and set a team's defense apart. And of course, the line suffered with the loss of Javian Cabrera, but we saw some guys step up big time. I mean, Julian Adams was a big presence on the line as well, and on the offensive side of things, Max Hunter stepping up eventually for the center position, kind of going in and out with Jacob Rice, I remember.
Yep.
But those guys have a pretty promising future next year on the line. I think that the Hawks are going to have a pretty strong line on both sides of the ball next season.
Yeah, exactly. And to that extent, they still have a lot of good threats. I mean, Levi Pittard will now be fully healed by then, and that's going to be amazing. Connor James, you're going to have.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you're going to have. It's going to be really interesting. I'm excited to see if Bear Calhoun will stay and Noah Pareda.
I'm really glad you brought up Bear. He really impressed me in the last couple of games. Didn't get a lot of playing time in, I guess we could say, the regular season, but in those 2 consolation games, he was on the field a little bit more.
He was.
And the presence, he made his presence known, and that was very impressive to me. He is only a freshman right now, actually. So a lot of years ahead for him with the program. But the rise of the younger kids in the later half of the season, I think, really brought a lot of energy to this team, including Connor James. And maybe not a younger kid. He's only he's a junior, I believe. But you brought up Jack Phillips before. And, I mean, this guy is a beast. Yeah. He's the only player on the team that had a kick return for a touchdown. It was an onside kick. But to have a kicker who is that aggressive and physical on defense and then, returning it for a touchdown, it's remarkable. I mean, if he keeps up with this kind of play, he's going to be the next Pat McAfee.
Really? Yeah. I mean, seeing what that guy does to go through and train is absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the whole team really reflects learning well from their coaches and trying to figure out how to work better as a team no matter where they stand in the season. So,
despite the tough record, they definitely rallied towards the end of the coaching staff, stuck with the players, made things work when they could, and I mean, it was a great time to be a Redhawks fan right at the end of the season when you had a couple wins at home. So Absolutely. And of course, some losses on the senior side of things with Colin West and Caden James, Ben Karen. Those are going to be missed a lot. Especially, I think some more offensive production will be an issue that they'll have to focus on for next season. All right, and now we're going to talk about volleyball. I changed my shirt. So, girls volleyball, they had a pretty strong regular season, some ups and downs, a tough start overall, but they went on a really big win streak. Let me see here. That's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I believe it was an 8-game win streak to close out their regular season, which brought them to a 14-6 record overall. Just a little bit less successful than last year's record, which was 17-5. And a lot of seniors on this roster expecting a lot of great things with a lot of experience. And they had to move on from their coach, Sean McDonald. But, you could have a lot of faith in Courtney Perrin as well. She was working with McDonald for a long time. So things seemed to be going in the right direction for the volleyball team, and they just ended up falling short. This is the first time in 18 years straight they've won Western Mass, and they lost in the semifinals to Wacona 3-1.
Yeah, it's absolutely another devastating loss. That has been one of the longest held Frontier records, if I do believe. Like, that is remarkable. I have to say they played really solid. It's like this team has certainly showed like the Frontier girls volleyball that we're used to seeing. A lot of shutouts in the season, and really solid, like absolute domination against there. It's like they had a rough start too, and yet still they were shut out after shut out after shut out.
Yeah,
and
I think
strong.
The one point of possible concern that I saw going into Western Mass when looking back on their schedule was their games played against Longmeadow. They played 2 games against Longmeadow. It's a team in their conference, and they lost both of them. And typically what I expect from this team and what I've seen in previous years was, a learning curve, and a steady progression, sometimes even an exponential one where they just get fantastically better all of a sudden. But they lost to Longmeadow their first time they met them 3-0, and then they lost again 3-1. So just a one set improvement. You can mark that for some marginal improvements, I suppose, but still, that kind of spelled a bit of concern for me going into Western Mass, and that ended up being the final score against Wacona, which they haven't played Wacona since the 2010s, I think Mass Live said.
Yeah.
So it was a strange matchup there.
Absolutely, yeah. But nevertheless, these teams, there's really solid players on this team, and many of them are seniors, like you said. I think
a lot of them.
Definitely one we have to mention is Abby Hernandez.
Oh yeah,
that's for sure.
Yeah,
she got some exceptional recognition at that special game.
I'm not sure if it was all state or all Western Mass. I can't quite remember.
It was one of the two, but it was still very impressive. And the other captains, Emily Candelaria and Liv Machon, have been doing fantastic. Yeah,
huge leaders on the team. And even the non-captains, the other seniors, you can talk about Davis, Stilla, just leaving huge marks on the court. And even the seniors that didn't play quite as much, they play their heart out there. And unfortunately, we're not going to be seeing a lot of them next year. A lot of seniors leaving. That taking up the majority of the roster is seniors. So it's going to be an interesting turnaround next year. We kind of talked about this when we covered some of their games a little bit, and we can't really say what we could expect from the team next year because we don't know how a lot of the younger players play because they don't get a lot of time on the court, Tyler.
Absolutely. That often is just how it is. But volleyball, they need to stay dominant so they have their strongest players in. We have to mention some of the juniors are really strong, but below that, we're not too sure exactly how it's going to go. Yeah,
it's tough to say. We haven't seen a lot of them. Bailey Martin definitely is a younger player that sticks out to me. She's got a lot of guts out on the court and plays very well when she's out there. But even most of the other players, I just really can't say because I haven't seen them play. And you have to hope that Coach Parent doesn't let this season, get to her head or anything like that. They also, to, add a positive note to all of this, they got all the way to the state's quarterfinals as well. Right. So a nice deep run to kind of combat the loss in Western Mass. But, that's something that as a coach can stay with you.
Absolutely, Mason. It's tough to take over from such a veteran coach, but I have no doubt that she'll soon reach the same esteem that the previous coach did. So.
Yeah, and just hoping for a good turnaround at using that this season that just ended as a positive thing as opposed to letting it weigh you down. That's that really is what the difference maker is, I think, for volleyball here and for a lot of teams moving forward that we're going to talk about going forward. Okay. All right, and next up, right up here, you can read it. It's soccer. We're going to start with the boys soccer team because the alphabet. So boys soccer, this is a team that we followed a lot, Tyler. It was a very exciting season for them, pretty dominant as well. 12-2-4 was their record. They tied with South Hadley for their conference championship. So they were co-champions this year, which was, I'm not sure if it's happened in recent years, but they made it happen this year. And they did not go very far in Western Mass. They lost in the first round against a very experienced Chicopee team who's, I think, a couple divisions higher than we are. But the states run made up for it. One of the best states runs we saw from this year and in the past several years as well, going all the way to the semifinals. But let's break down this regular season first. Went on a couple different win streaks, but a few important ties and a loss to East Hampton.
Yeah, it was a really interesting season, Mace, because a lot of the teams had a very strong reaction to playing against us, and other teams just couldn't handle it. We played Mahar 8-0. What a commanding win right there.
Yeah, I think that was their biggest win on the season.
I mean, and there I see some 7-0, 7-1s. But, I got to say, the East Hampton loss was pretty substantial, just an 0-1.
Yeah, and I mean that kickstarted a big conversation in the team of changing some things up in the early stages of the season. Before that game, it was you'd see Pachurik up top with a similar formation pretty much every game. It was working for them. They have won every single one of the games except for a tie to Monument Mountain. They were pretty much satisfied with that. They felt like they commanded most of that game. I remember talking to a few of the players, but then they lost to East Hampton, and there was some discussion of blame going around who was responsible for that goal. But then it turned around to, well, who's responsible for us getting shut out? Because we didn't score anything, and we've let up just one goal from teams previously. We should be able to come back from that. And so it became a whole focus on their offense, and they were able to combat that pretty well in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely, Mason. I mean, we have to definitely give a shout out to Ian Pachurik.
Yeah,
he played his heart out throughout the season, getting a lot of good takes, seeing down the field and being able to know where to go. And the rest of the team would try to fed it to him as much as they could to get some good goals in there.
Yeah.
And it was really impressive.
And they had plenty of seniors that were helping to lead the team out there, especially on the back line. You had Ben Cachuongo and Tavo Vincent Warner. They were on the back line pretty regularly. Tavo moved up to midfield once or twice, but that had to do with the formation that they were playing. But TJ Donovan on the wing as well made a huge mark on the season. Some really great crosses that we saw. And you have to give a huge applause to Will Redding because, and this is going to lead us into the States run, because this was the playoff MVP pretty much. He scored. It was a 1-1 game at the end of regulation in the first round against Nantucket. Double extra time, Redding scores an absolute banger too.
Oh, yeah.
Into the far side of the goal to give the Hawks the lead, advance them to the next round. And then he ends up scoring ultimately the game-winning goal against Pittsfield, which was one of the biggest upsets of the whole tournament. It went all the way. It was a 3-3 tie, went all the way to the sixth frame of penalty kicks, and the Hawks won 4-3, partially thanks to him and also Jack Cusson.
Yeah, I mean, that Pittsfield game was the most exciting game I've ever been to, for the record. That was absolutely phenomenal. But yeah, we got to say, Jack Cusson, after Owen Babb leaving to DA, that's a huge loss.
Absolutely.
Owen has been a star goalie for years and years, and now Jack Cusson, much younger, much shorter goalie. That's a huge, like, having a keeper that's smaller than you had before. That's a huge change. He
relies on a different style. He relies on some more speed and agility than Owen did. But it's been working for the Redhawks. They got all the way to the semifinals, as we said, upset the third seeded team, the sixth seeded team, and almost took down the number 2 team, which was Linfield. They only lost to them 1-0, and that was just a complete back and forth game. We were there together.
Absolutely.
And that was, crazy game to watch. But the other really encouraging thing, there's some very important seniors that are leaving this year from the boys soccer program, but some really big rising stars. You can talk about the junior class beyond Pachurik. You got Gus Radner, you got Eric Larson, and looking on the back line, Casey Bessler, who's not a junior, but a new transfer to Frontier, really stepping up back there, as well as Tristan Valderrama, who held his own when they shifted to the 4-back formation.
Absolutely, and you have shifty players like Matt Smollett and Diego Frazier coming out.
Yeah.
It's like they are super strong, and you love to see them. And Carter Miller as well.
There's a lot of players on all different sides of the field that can make things change just really quickly. And another player that really stood out, just coming out of nowhere pretty much from the JV squad, was Mickey Brownlow. Yeah. And that's a really good sign right there for that, long-term opportunities this program is going to have. So a really great season for the boys soccer program. Getting cut short right before, their ultimate goal, which they weren't really able to meet, but it's still an amazing, amazing season. Well, we're going to shift over here to the girls soccer team. They didn't go as far, had a similar trip in Western Mass where they lost in that first round, facing both of the Redhawks teams were seated low, faced some really tough teams, higher divisions, but huge improvements from last year.
Absolutely, Mason. Yeah, last year was a bit of a struggle, but you thought 8-0 was a big lead. Whoa, wait until you see their game against Mahar. 15-0.
Yeah.
What a win.
biggest win I've seen in a soccer match. Just really,
I was surprised
ever,
when there was
honestly.
no like area in the rule book where you would mercy them. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like that's just impeccable.
Yeah, I was really surprised about that. And they ended the season 14-5, a better record than the boys soccer team had. But unfortunately, they had they had an easier strength of schedule than them. Ended up being a lower seed in the States tournament, which they won. Their preliminary match against Carver, which was a bit of a trip for them.
Right.
And then they got knocked out by Hamilton Wenham. But this is, you take, the good with the bad. The good is that they won their conference undefeated, one of two teams at Frontier to do that.
Yeah, absolutely, Mace. Yeah, it was incredibly strong. You see players that we have to shout out here, Claire McFarland and Josie Fosno, the only two seniors on the team.
Yeah. And that's another good sign for longevity, important players, big leaders, but you have younger players that are captains. Jazzy Hayes was a captain. She's only a sophomore. And that is something that is really encouraging. And when you have, I'm pretty sure that their top scorer, one of their top scorers was Maddie Fagan.
Right.
Yeah, she was. But like Fagan, Steele, just players on the front line that are making big differences, and having, again, a young goalie. Just like Jack Cusson, you have in goal for the girls' team is Aylin Shaw, who is their starting keeper. And she's only a freshman. Cusson's only a sophomore, I believe. Was he a sophomore?
It's very young.
He's a freshman. Both are freshmen.
Well. Yeah.
So both young keepers for these two teams, and promising future for both of them. They look very good this year.
And we gotta say, paired with a good keeper, you always have to have a good defense. And both of these teams had a really strong defensive senior helping them out. Ben Catchawander for the boys and Claire McFarland for the girls.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a trend with all of this relatively successful Frontier teams this year. If you have a lot of strength on defense, or even just some marginal strength there, you're going to do well on offense, because it comes full circle. If you aren't letting the opposing team get chances in your end, you're going to have more chances in your end, but
Absolutely.
In their end, I should say. But the other important thing from this year was they had their third new coach in 3 years, and for the first time, it was a success. They had a winning record this year with Coach Lauren Sullivan. And that was a definitely big turnaround. They had an 8-9-1 record last year. Didn't even qualify for states. So it was a big turnaround, and it looks to be an encouraging future for the program here.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, they have some really strong younger players, so I feel like they're gonna do just fine with the replacements.
Yeah. All right, and now the last sport that FCAT really follows that we're going to be talking about is field hockey. We don't really end up filming the other sports that we have in the fall, but we'll be talking about them nonetheless, because they had some pretty remarkable seasons as well. But field hockey, Tyler, right up there with boys soccer as probably the best team that the Redhawks had in the fall this year.
Absolutely. I got to say that I never knew exactly how exciting and entertaining this team really is. Going out to some of these games has been really amazing. They have been consistently shutting teams out, and it's just insane to see Missy Mahar take down some big teams.
Yeah, and it was a season that was set up right from the beginning. They looked really good. They only lost 2 seniors in the year prior to that. Important seniors nonetheless, but still only 2. You can move forward with that, like we were saying with girls soccer. And they also gained 3 new players, transfers from Pioneer, who played on the Greenfield team, which we learned was actually a co-op last year. So that was, and those players were pretty important in the whole course of the season. Amelia Bouchard, Addie Harrington, and Lauren Kalinowski were the 3 transfers from Pioneer that really helped improve the level of play that Frontier was playing at.
Absolutely, but they already had a very strong base from the seniors: Tyra Richards, Claire Kirkendall,
Oh, yeah.
Ashley Taylor, and Delaney Fifield.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough turnaround next year with all of those really important seniors leaving, especially Kyra Richards. She's been in goal for I don't even know how long she has been playing. I have to imagine since 7th grade. She strikes me as that kind of a player, but she has a serious amount of experience that's going to be missed a lot. The times that I did see their backup, Brooke Charest, in goal, she looked pretty good as well, which is, of course, encouraging. But, nonetheless, I think the biggest loss is going to be on that back line with Delaney and Abby Grover as well. And I think Kirkendall is also on the back line. Yeah, so it's when you talk about the defense starting up a great offense, this is exactly what I was talking about. This is the team that did it best, and this is the team that went the farthest out of any team at Frontier.
Yeah, right. It really came out of left field, but they were playing very, very strong, and it's incredible to see how they're very deep throughout it. They have so many strong players.
Yeah, 14-2-2 was their overall record on the season. They ended up winning Western Mass, and here, again, impressive stats here. They won Western Mass for the 3rd year in a row, and it was for those 3 years they beat Greenfield every single time. So, pretty huge rivalry that the Hawks are on top of right now. And in the regular season, maybe even more important than Western Mass 2, Missy Mahar, was their victory against Longmeadow, which is the first time in 23 years of coaching here at Frontier she's ever beaten Longmeadow with this team.
Yeah, obviously Longmeadow is a really strong, really good program for field hockey.
Oh, yeah.
So this was a very, very impressive defeat.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
And they also really challenged themselves with some of their independent games as well in the regular season. They played against Sutton, who was the team that knocked them out of state last year.
Right.
So they only lost to them 1-0, and they pretty proud of that. Most of the players were, of course, some of them being a little bit more pessimistic, but when they made their run in states, they got all the way to the semifinals, lost 5-0 against Uxbridge, which we'll give them some credit for that. Only holding them to 5 is what I'm going to give them credit for.
Exactly.
Because Uxbridge, that is the powerhouse for field hockey in Massachusetts. I don't even know how many D1 commits they have. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's just absolutely insane. To be able to play against such a strong team like that is impressive. I gotta say, they're just a fantastic team overall. Really solid young players. A lot of teams were in all Western Mass games last year. A lot of players were, right?
A lot of them were. There was Kirkendall was, Abby Grover was, Ashley Taylor, and Macy DeMeo as well. A great finisher out on the front line. All made it into the first or second team all Western Mass.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's impressive.
It's an elite program. It's, I think, historically, field hockey, volleyball have been the top programs for Frontier, and that seems to be continuing this year. Might be a tough turnaround, but with 23 years of experience now, I don't doubt that Coach Maher is going to find a way to make the next season very successful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like has been consistently just reloading instead of just replacing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good to see.
And they've got a pretty deep program as well. That was something I wanted to mention with volleyball, where oh my God, all of these seniors are leaving. What are we going to do? Well, they have 2 teams underneath them. They have JV and middle school. So it's the program runs very deep, and so does field hockey. So that has to do with, the greater success of varsity sports at Frontier, just the overall interest at younger ages as well. All right, and now we're moving on to the final 3 teams of the fall, starting off with golf. Now, they had a pretty good season as well. All of the Frontier teams really had some marginally successful seasons. And golf was among them, 12-6 on the regular season, and a couple really big wins, especially against Hampshire. They were very proud of that. I remember talking to Ryan Seto, who, this is one of the sports, these last two sports, golf and cross country, more focused individually, not the typical structure that you see, which kind of makes it a little bit more difficult for us to cover on FCAT.
And it's hard to follow them throughout the holes with the camera. That's why we don't do it. But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But Ryan Seto, speaking of him, we can focus on the individuals the way that they do with a lot of scoring. He, in Western Mass, that was the farthest. It's very difficult to get into states for golf. I should preface by saying that. The whole team placed 6th overall in Western Mass, which they were very proud of.
Very impressive.
And it was led by both junior, Ryan Seto, and a senior, Camden Skiffington. They both tied for the same place, 28th individually in Western Mass. And we're talking, really I don't even know how many kids were there, like at least a couple hundred, I'd say. So it was...
What a day.
Yeah. Or at least 100. I'll grant you that.
Right, exactly. And but you gotta say, this team has a lot of young players. Like I gotta say, I know Brady Wood. He's only in 7th grade, but he tied for 44th in Western Mass.
Yeah, I mean, huge numbers from the younger kids on this team as well, and even not like that young. Jacob Cornelison tied for 37th. And so, I mean, they'll miss their seniors for sure, but they've got a good young group of kids that they can rely on. Christian Powell, also throw him into the mix. He competed well in Western Mass, 61st overall.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so they did not win their conference, but they came in 2nd, which they're in a pretty competitive conference too. Okay. Granted, I mean, I already talked about Hampshire. Their first match that they had against Hampshire, they lost by only 1 point. So the scoring, of course, is different in golf and cross country and these kinds of sports, but still that close of a margin is huge, and that definitely set them up for a very good season. The middle of the season seemed to be very good for a lot of Frontier teams, a lot of win streaks. Including golf, where they went on, looks like 7 games straight. Yeah, 7 games in a row they won right in the middle of their season.
And one thing we got to mention here is like these games are both home and away, so they're playing on many different places, and they're still able to do really solid.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing. And I'll just touch on this briefly before we move on to cross country, but the home versus away in most sports is not maybe the biggest difference. I think mentally it definitely could be, jitters. But as opposed to, physically, you're dealing with relatively the same turf. I guess exception could be field hockey, where you have like a turf field versus, something with a lot of ruts on if they don't, keep the grass and the turf very like well kept, I guess. Right. But golf, it's completely different everywhere you play. It's a very different course. There's different, sand, water hazards, all that stuff, the lay of everything. I mean, I have to imagine, because I don't really know that much about the golf team, but I have to imagine they go and scout out the courses like before they play there.
Make sure,
or maybe even have a practice there.
Or they walk through it at least,
Yeah. And that is something, we can move on to cross country with that comment, because I used to run cross country, and that was something that we did just about every meet. If you're going to somewhere that you haven't been before, or even just you haven't been to in a minute, go and walk the course. And a lot of the schools that we went to would have someone that leads a walkthrough of the course, because you're running through the woods most of the time, and sometimes on the roads, and like you got to know where to turn, especially if like the markers aren't like very clear. So, but with the boys team, we'll start with them. They had an 11-2 record. They won their league yet again. I believe that's I don't know how many years in a row it is, but it's a lot.
Yeah, they're strong.
And their 2 losses are to some very tough teams, granted. The first one was PVCICS, which was the Chinese immersion school, and then Hampshire. And so just to put this into perspective, they lost by very, very small margins. And of course, the scoring is a little difficult to explain, so I won't go into that. But for the Chinese immersion school, they tied. It was dead heat, 28-28, and they had to go to a 6th runner, which is outside of the typical scoring margin, to decide like which of the team's 6 runners came in before the other one, and it ended up being the Chinese immersion school, which is how it was basically, that was their tiebreaker.
It's very tight, yeah.
Which is insane. And they only lost by 1 point to Hampshire, which again, super close. That can come down to a matter of mere seconds. That's what happened a couple years ago. I remember it was a meet against Mohawk that I ran, and it was literally just a 1 second difference on the finish line, and we lost by 1 point. So a very good season regardless of those 2 losses.
Yeah, and you got to say, this team has no worries about their future. They have some really strong younger players. A junior, for one, Luke Howard, has done fantastic. He got 9th in states, but even more impressive, Evan. Oh, my goodness.
Evan Hedlund,
a sophomore, got sixth place in states.
Yeah, and I can tell you, he's been doing this since he's like 7th, 8th grade.
Right.
He's been doing this just casually. He's a fantastic athlete, a great runner. He's on both the indoor track and outdoor track teams as well. And he, I think that he ended up placing very well in a specifically middle school meet, like nationwide, a couple years back. So a very impressive runner there, and also some 8th graders that are kind of up and coming. They ran in states. But a couple seniors, not that many though. I think that's the important thing. They don't have that many seniors that they're going to be relying on, I guess.
Yeah.
They're leading the team in the race, literally, but also, in terms of the actual spirit of the team, morale and everything. But they have guys that they can rely on that are going to be stepping up next year.
Absolutely, Mace. I think that's a good transition for girls cross country, because they have some fantastic well-roundedness, but they got to say one player stands out from the rest.
Sylvie DeBartolomeo.
Oh, yeah.
It's ridiculous what she can do on the course.
I know, Mason. It's insane. 17th in states, which is impressive. That's far beyond our teammates, and that's incredible for our area. So that is just absolutely impressive. I got to say, got to give them a special shout-out, because we got to make sure they felt a little bit underappreciated in our coverage of the year. But I got to say, they're undefeated for the 2nd year in a row. Yeah. Very, very awesome. I have to say, they're lead champs for the past 5 years. They did really well in some important races, like the duck races, twilight races.
Oh, yeah.
And, they did amazing. 5th Western Mass, 8th in the divisional state championships, and I think it was 15th at the meet of champions
in the states.
Yeah. That was pretty solid, and overall, I got players on the team who are saying they're definitely going to be very strong in future years as well.
Oh yeah, I don't doubt it. They've got some incredible depth, Tyler. And the other thing is, you mentioned the undefeated season and the recent history that they have had. Historically, to the best of my knowledge, it's been the boys cross country team that has been, more successful, winning league and so on and so forth than the girls, and that seems to be swinging the other way now in recent years. They had, I think it might have been their first, or it was just the first in a long time, undefeated season last year, and they're continuing it this year with, I think that their closest. I'm trying to look back at the scores here from what I do have. The bottom line is there weren't close meets. I think that the closest one that they did have was against Hampshire. Yeah, a 3-point difference there, 28-31. But most of them, they swept it. The best score, 15-50. That is the best score you can get in a cross-country meet. And they did that so consistently. Yep. And to a certain point, that has to do with strength of schedule. But they're running against hard teams. The Chinese immersion school and Hampshire as an independent, it's a very gutsy thing to do. But yeah, they have a lot of really talented younger runners. Leif Christensen, 72nd in states, and she's the one that kind of stands out to me the most, kind of leading the charge there with the younger group of runners, and they're definitely going to miss their group of seniors: Sasha Malo, Perla Ordaz, Mary Burt, Sylvie DeBartolomeo. Those are, again, the spirit of the team is with those 4 players, but I think that the amount of faith that those seniors have put in the younger kids is going to translate into future years.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a lot of strong personalities that I think definitely will translate really well once they get seniority.
Yeah, exactly. And so, again, just a really great season overall for both cross-country teams. We'll see if if my prediction proves to be true with girls cross-country kind of getting the upper hand in future years. But bottom line is both teams are looking really strong for the future and continuing that trend of Frontier having really great runners at their school.
And absolutely. And then to further extend, overall, like, our fall seasons this year and past years have been really strong.
Yeah.
Like, overall, like, we've had so many good teams that have been having some really good strength of schedule, but also just great wins and some good runs in states, Western Mass.
Yeah, and as unfortunate as it might be for you and me leaving this year at the end of this year, but I think that I can put a lot of faith in the teams that are going to come together next season. And I think, I'm going to make a bold prediction, but I think that next fall season is going to be the best fall season that Frontier has seen in a long time. Things seem to be lining up pretty well. And, some concerns of the, some leaders coming on in like a couple years, but again, it's a little too early to really be projecting all of that.
Right.
But, a good group of guys on the soccer teams, and for football, things started to seem to be turning around a little bit with that line, with the defense, and you just got to find what works on the offense.
Absolutely.
And it might come together next year.
Yeah, they're getting some really interesting different like player ideas, and they're going to have a really strong schedule next year. I believe they're reconferencing, which is really cool. All right, interesting news there. But we won't get into that now. But yeah, really solid season.
Yeah, so we're very excited for next year. Maybe we'll come back and watch a couple if we can get a break from college. But yeah, that's the recap of the fall season. We're gonna do a little brief overview of the winter sports, I think, here. But yeah, nothing else really to say about fall sports, I think. Just really strong and a good future there. But turning the leaf over, I guess, basketball, boys and girls, promising years is what I'm looking at.
Absolutely, Mason. Yeah, these teams have come out super strong right away. Immediately, no losses, really strong wins. Some of these teams, like I gotta say right away that the girls have done fantastic. I don't feel like any one of their games they could have got at like 80 or over 100 points if they didn't have to slow down and play well-rounded. Yeah. But they did fantastic. Their coaches have been there for at least a couple of years. Yeah, both of them. Yep, exactly. And the teams are very strong together. Got some strong captains. And just to see.
Yeah, and I think that the good thing, you pointed out the strength that the girls team has had. The important thing that they've done is, they've slowed down at the end of games. But even more than that, they've let other players step up, get experience, and shine on the court, which, come to tournament time, that's going to be really valuable to have that on-court experience. And then, turn it into points, which, can happen if they get put on the court, which, that would mean like an injury or something like that to one of your starters or, first off the bench players. But they both have had a couple tough games, but girls have definitely had it a little bit easier to start it off. Their strength of schedule gets a little bit tougher as they go along later in the season. But, for both teams to start off undefeated after not just like one or two, but we're talking like the girls are 5-0 now. The boys are 3-0. They're starting off really, really promisingly.
Absolutely. And of course, these games are going to get harder later in the season, but we have no doubt that they're going to have really good runs in Western Mats and States, and we will, through FCAT, be covering as many of those games as we possibly can.
Yeah, and some that we won't be able to cover quite as much, but hopefully, again, during the tournament is the Greenfield Ice Hockey Co-op, which also is undefeated. Yep. So we have our three primary teams that we're going to be focusing on during the winter season, all undefeated right now. Right. The hockey team is 4-0 right now after just beating Gardner in the closest game they've had so far, 4-2. And they have a big group of kids from a lot of different schools that are all really coming together very well. There isn't just one person that is really scoring all the goals. It's spread out. You're seeing everyone really chip in and playing very physical. So all of these teams are looking very promising. It'll be a really exciting winter season as well. We'll try and get to cover wrestling as well. I've had Caden James talk to me a little bit, ask a couple times if we're going to come and cover wrestling meets. So we'll try and get out and do that as well.
Absolutely.
But just really excited about that winter season, Tyler.
Yeah, absolutely, Mace. I mean, this is always a fun one. We're going to get out to many games. We're separating our forces to be able to try to get as many as we can.
Yep.
It'll be good, but yeah, I mean, that's all the information I feel like we have for now. We're going to learn more about more of our co-op teams, but it's all the information we have this far early in the season.
Yeah, and so we're going to be doing another one of these, hopefully, at the end of the winter season as well, and then look forward to the spring sports. So we'll be talking more about the track and field, swimming co-op, and I think we got a skiing co-op as well, alpine skiing co-op. I think that's with Mohawk. But yeah, we'll get some more information about that in the future and tell you all about it at the end of the winter season. So thank you all very much for tuning in to this episode of the Redhawk Roundup. I've been Mason Smith here with Tyler Wolkowitz. Logan Wolkowitz is behind the camera, and as always, a big thank you to Kevin Murphy for making all of this possible here at FCAT Studios. So be sure to check in and check out all of the streams that we have for the winter sports. It's going to be a very exciting season. We will see you at the games.